no, like that.
There we go. That's a good first attempt. I think I want more emotion. I want more volume. But it's a good first iteration.
Young man, I have to find a public space where I can really let myself go. Okay.
Okay.
And there are places, because right now I'm gonna be going to Miami, and that's a place where I can yell and be crazy, and it would be in a public space, of course.
Very fitting. Well, another statistic was that Kamala didn't outperform Biden in a single state, not one.
Nobody likes her.
I saw that clip on CNN where they said, okay, let's go to the comparison slide now. Let's see how Kamala is doing compared to Biden. And they were optimistic and thinking, okay, at least we're going to see some green states here where comparatively Kamala is actually performing better amongst the voters. And it was just gray. The whole map of the United States was gray because not a single state preferred Kamala over Biden, essentially. They didn't vote more for her than they had done for Biden in the previous election.
Right.
Yeah. Anders, I want to hear what your take is on why Trump won now and why he didn't win in 2020.
Oh, great question. Just to comment a little bit about me betting on neither of them winning, but instead some kind of extraordinary event happening. I didn't believe that, but I put it in as a bet just to make it apparent, because I mean I'm the conspiracy theorist in this room, so well, I mean, why did Trump win this time but not the last time? Well, looking at it from the outside, I mean that there's one big anomaly, and that is that 15 million votes disappeared from the Democrats, despite there being more registered voters this time than last time. So my bet is that essentially Trump beat Clinton, Biden, and Harris. In reality, he beat all of them. So this did come as a surprise. I think that this might actually be a genuine reflection of what, a real vote would look like. And it's Trump winning in a landslide, but not crushing, like some people might suggest that actually he has in reality 80% supporters. No, that's probably an exaggeration. But I think this could be quite accurate.
Okay, so can you clarify what exactly we're talking about? I mean, I have a rough idea what you're referring to, but because I've seen these comparisons as well, where you compare the total number of votes in 2020 versus 2024, and there's a big gap. So what have you seen? Like, what reporting is this? Where are these numbers coming from?
Well, I haven't researched it thoroughly. I've just seen it mentioned. It didn't surprise me at all when it was presented. Like, how is it that Biden got 81 million popular vote, and then that diminishes by none less than, 15 million plus? Where did all those votes go?
Right. And now also you must have, at least 1 million illegal immigrants more than you had in 2020. And I assume presumably some of those voted, even though some states were very strict, a lot of critique. I think there was more talk this election about fake votes and non-citizens voting than there was in 2020. So presumably there was still nonetheless were some states that they did not require IDs for voting. So there should have been more illegal votes.
One thing to mention
is that sounds very suspicious.
The
voting booth thought, yeah, we don't need an ID. Just go ahead and vote. Like,
one thing to mention. We like to compare Sweden and the United States, Europe and the United States. In in Sweden, people are registered like in state registers in a way that's not allowed in the United States, like where do you live and so on. So there's an opportunity to cheat in a way in the United States by, I mean, inventing people, dead people, like registering as, because there is no sort of central control that can actually validate all these people. So if you were to cheat in a Swedish election, you would have to go about in some other way. It's interesting to speculate whether things like this could have happened also in Swedish elections. But in that case, you know, just inventing a number of dead people, that wouldn't really work here. Or what do you say, Gustav?
Right. No, I mean, they require you to show your ID here. So I think that's enough of a barrier for fake votes. You can nonetheless probably do some sort of, you know, under the table shenanigans, but it's harder.
I agree. This is harder, but you have to do it in another manner, I would say.
Right.
I voted. I had to show my ID. This was a sticker they give you. I voted over here in Lee County, right here, Lee County, and I had to present my ID. Now, my ID was just, they just like saw it, typed in some number on their computer, and then like I just went through, you know. I feel like it's a bit, I don't know too much about how these operations are in like, say, blue states where people, where there's like sanctuary cities and you can just there's less federal control. But in my experience, like the voting stations have always been here in Florida pretty rigorous.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. I want to ask you guys 2 questions so we don't get too stuck on election fraud. I think that's just something that's very hard to answer if it actually happened or not. A lot of speculation, but 2 questions I'm curious to hear your answers to. And the first one is, what are you excited about with the new Trump administration? And what are you not so excited about with this new president and administration? Who wants to start?
Anders, go ahead.
Well, my answer is pretty simple. I mean, I'm happy with all aspects of Trump and his administration continuation. So that was easy. So now I pass on to.
Well, specifically, there must be one thing that you think an additional amount about. Like, I don't know, he wants to reform education. He is going to drain the swamp. What is it that you are extra excited about?
Well, I mean, in the long term, I want to abolish income tax, central banking, state education. What more do I want?
We're going back, folks.
Yeah, I mean, anything that has to do with the state. Now it starts to sound a little bit like a libertarian, but I want to emphasize that I think there are aspects of this reform program which also has to do with taking care of the elders better. I mean, greater subsidies, greater pensions, things like that. And that isn't typically, you know, the pure libertarian stance. So yeah, that's what I hope for.
Okay. A reduced government spending, a reduced state, smaller state. Albert?
Well, looking at this, at the cabinet people he appointed, and looking at just the overall element of this campaign, this isn't the same Trump of 2016. I feel that his second term would be very different than his first term. And if there's one thing I notice is that I feel like there's more of this like multicultural libertarianism in this new Trump administration than in the previous one, which seemed very like evangelical and neoconservative. Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, all these types, Rex Tillerson. It seemed very much like, it still had like the smell of like old 90s, Washington conservative Christian types. Now you have J.D. Vance, you have Marco Rubio, you have Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, you have Kristi Noem. It's a more flexible Republican Party than what it used to be.
RFK, even Bernie, they're talking with. So yeah, it's
you have RFK,
diverse group of people.
It's younger too. It's a younger administration, apart from Trump himself. And it just seems like a more flexible, more women, just more political outsiders, and I think that's going to shake up the House a bit. That's going to rock the boat a little bit, and I'm excited to see how he's going to handle the semi-quincentennial, which is the 250th anniversary of the U.S., a quarter millennia. It's going to be a huge festival here in 2026. That's also going to be when the FIFA World Cup happens. And the FIFA World Cup is going to be a multinational event with Canada and Mexico. How are the relations with Canada and Mexico going to be? The last administration, he made a whole new deal with them. So keep in mind, he's going to have to deal with Sheinbaum downstairs in Mexico, the first female president of Mexico. And in Canada, he's going to have to deal with Trudeau for a bit before he gets replaced. And that's going to be an interesting episode too, what happens in Canada. I'm excited for how this new Trump administration will handle the digital world too. Big tech, right? Remember that? Remember when he got banned from Twitter in 2021?
Yeah, that's a big topic. I think we're going to talk about that. Anders, what's your negative? Because I think, okay, so am I right that Albert, you're looking forward to like the government being younger, more diverse, a bit more outsiders, so we can shake things up a bit more? I agree. That is the case. We definitely have a more exciting group of people now. But Anders, what is your, let's say, skepticism with the new administration? Is there something that you would be a bit cautious about when it comes to Trump and the people he is employing? Or any plan that they have where you maybe don't have as much faith in what he's going to do? He said he's going to reform education. He's definitely talked about the SEC, and there's been talk about the Federal Reserve even. I think that's harder to change, but I mean, to Albert's point, this time he has some experience. He has admitted that his first time as president was he made some mistakes in the people he chose. I think he's openly admitted that
he was a rookie.
Pence wasn't the best choice, and
yeah, I think last time
now he has that experience.
It was necessary to hire some people from the old swamp, not to make things too obvious. So I mean that there were people like Pence and John Bolton and probably other names, and it's very, very hard from the outside to figure out who was really a good guy. And but I don't know. My concern going forward is perhaps that we might not be able to go back to I mean the original ideas of the Constitution, because people are so brainwashed into the deep state way of thinking that this process is going to be prolonged. I mean, for a very large time. I mean, that's my concern. I'm hoping that we could have a more sudden awakening moment, but yeah, that's my I don't know, worry, but that's my uncertainty is the timing of all this. I mean, it could be extremely prolonged for decades, or I can also see that no, it actually is much swifter than that. That they just need to set the stage properly, and then the awakening process is quite quick. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people here tend to exaggerate the flaws and the negativities that could happen, but ultimately, it's people here want change, and what the media doesn't do a good job at talking about, because why would they do anything right, is talking about why the US has gone into this transition. Why has this populism surged? Why is Donald Trump becoming popular? Why have the Democrats become this politically correct San Francisco type of party? The media doesn't really okay, let's sit down and have a talk about this. A lot of that has to do with just the way the whole world has changed, the way the last 30, 40 years have impacted. And
may I throw a question to you guys? Because people have strong opinions about Donald Trump, as we know. What did he do as president during his first period in office? What did he do? Do you have any clue? What did he do?
Yeah, a major one is signing a peace agreement with Afghanistan, with the Taliban government there, and getting the hell out of there. That was a major one. That was a huge one. And another one that people should also remember is, again, signing a new trade deal with Canada and Mexico. I look at foreign policy a lot. I come across very much into foreign policy. In domestic policy, I would say that in domestic policy, he did the 3 judges. So it'll be Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. Putting these 3 judges into the Supreme Court essentially made it so that in 2022, Roe versus Wade gets flipped back to what it was, and the states decide on their own abortion laws, which on paper looks really intense, but in practice and in de facto terms, a lot of the states they were already making abortion quite difficult. So I don't think Trump has as much power in terms of like an executive as he does as a media influence. I think that his indirect powers are stronger than his direct powers, and that's something that not a lot of other presidents have. You know what I mean, Gustav?
I would also think of wars. Wars would be the first thought I have when I think about what did Trump do well. Public relations. I mean, he's a businessman. He can talk with Putin. He can talk with North Korea's president's name is slipping my mind, but essentially, what was it?
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un. He can talk with those guys, and I think most people felt a lot safer when he was in office, than compared to when Biden was in office, because and you saw, just as Trump won this month, you saw Putin go out and essentially say that what Trump did in Butler, Pennsylvania was very brave. That when he stood up and shouted, "Fight, fight, fight," Putin said that was very admirable. So already, Trump isn't even in the White House yet, but already there's a vibe shift globally. And I think that's really one of Trump's main strengths. He can talk, he can, not only be this nice guy who says we're not gonna try to create any conflict, he nonetheless, he asserts borders. He makes it very clear that if you mess with us, we're gonna mess with you. But he can also, there's not this unnecessary risk of nuclear war that you would have if Kamala would have won. I think we would have been in a very different global situation if she would have won, and the nuclear risk would have been way higher because of that reason, that she's not really able to talk with Putin or Kim because she just writes them off. And that's I don't think that's a wise move at all. You should be trying to talk to every country.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. It's something that not just her, but a lot of Democrats have,
But then, I mean, okay. So you mentioned peace with Afghanistan, new trade deals with Mexico and Canada. Well, is that sufficient to explain the Trump derangement syndrome? So it was because of this that so many people go nuts over Trump and call him the new Hitler
and the judges
and the start World War III, based on the experience of making peace with Afghanistan and negotiating trade deals with Canada and Mexico. How do you explain that?
Well, it's because a lot of it is just optics. The judges, like, if there's one domestic issue that really, irritated folks, it was two. There was the Supreme Court judges and the whole, they're putting kids in camps. They're separating children from their families at the border, which is something that a lot of other presidents do. It's something that's been a tradition here. Trump derangement syndrome, Anders, is more a result of media coverage than Donald Trump being a policy executive leader.
Right, but then we move on to the media. Why does the media have the Trump derangement syndrome in that case?
Because he's not polite like them.
Is that all?
I feel that.
What do you think, Gustav? What's going on?
I think we're getting closer to the answer. A big part of the answer is that it's really not about the policies at all. There's basically no discussion of policies whenever the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times writes a hit piece on Trump. It's always based on his profile, who he is as a person, and it's always ad hominem attacks. Now, if that's like the that's what's happening, that's what they're critiquing. If it's the core reason why he has been probably the most hated person in media in modern history, it's a different question. But I think we can at least first establish that it's not about the policies.
Right.
So it's him being orange and brash and not so polite.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of it has to do with that, and keep in mind that even when to use another example, when Boris Johnson was PM in Britain, a lot of the media did the same thing. When Johnson was president, and you probably have that a little bit too with Meloni in Italy. What the media wants ultimately is to be seen, is to rake in profits, have advertisers, have their sponsors, and the way they do it is through this yellow journalism tactic of sensationalism. And Trump feeds into that. Like, he's such a cash cow, especially in 2016 and until 2021. But even still, the media he likes it too. He gets a benefit from being covered. But
oh yeah, and that doesn't help. In a way, maybe it does help. I think now at this point, the truth is winning, and people can see that he's really not a bad guy, And I think a big part that made people realize this was their media strategy. The Trump team realized that the old media is dead. If you want to win, you need to go where the attention is, which is social media. So Trump went on the biggest podcast in the world, Joe Rogan. He sat with him for 3 hours. And I think anyone with a conscience can just watch 5 minutes of that and see that he's not a politician. He's not trying to think of what he's saying. He's generally saying what he thinks. He's not bought up. And it just became very apparent that the reason why Kamala didn't go on Joe Rogan was because she would have to have a earpiece, basically. And it would just become immediately apparent that she doesn't have any core beliefs. And the old media, of course, doesn't like someone with strong core beliefs, because the old media is dying. And the reason, I think a big part, to try to answer your question, Anders, why does the media hate him so much? I mean, money is always a part of the way people behave. You know, you can ask who's funding the media right now, because it is a losing business. And I think that's part of the answer as well. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, these big magazines, they have sponsors and they have interests. And just like now X has a big sponsor, Elon bought X with his own money. I would make the case that his interest isn't as malicious. He at least is trying to push for some sort of standard of free speech and being neutral. But nonetheless, any big propaganda machine is going to be influenced by its leader or owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these old media, like they're over 100 years old. Some of them, like they're so institutionalized and established in the system over here that people just see them as like, oh, well, if the New York Times said it, of course it's the New York Times. Oh, well, NBC and CBS said it, of course. It's CBS, it's NBC. It's treated over here as these paragons of American institutionalism, even though once upon a time they were just a small media company like everybody else.
And I think you can trace the ownership of all of these media channels back to the Swedish Wallenberg family somehow. Follow the dots.
We have a stake, I would assume.
Yeah, they have a stake, most likely. So, what influences what a magazine like the New York Times post can't always be super traceable to just one owner. But of course, averaged out, that it's going to have an influence. Who are the owners? Who, what companies have a board seat? They're going to be able to make certain decisions, maybe not on every article that's published, but they're going to have some sort of influence. So I think that's definitely a factor as well. Now, I think this is a big topic, but it really is the topic to discuss when we're having a post-election special like this. It's like, what's happening in terms of media and what is the new media landscape? And you could say that Trump is the first internet president because he did not win through traditional
I'd argue
means.
Obama was the first internet president.
Okay, that's an interesting case. Nonetheless, I think what was so genius about Trump's victory was what their media strategy was. And they realized that they're not going to win over boomers just watching CNN. They're not going to win over most millennials even watching CNBC, etc. But they realized there is a huge group of people, unactivated voters, that would like Trump, but they're just not engaged in politics at all because they're not watching old media, they're on the internet. So what the strategy was, from what I've heard, is we're not going to try to target these moms and retired people, because that would to convince someone like that would take, 8 hours maybe of conversation going back and forth on a topic. It's just not feasible. They're so deep in a certain way of looking at things. So instead, what they did is, we're going to go on Joe Rogan. We're going to go on these big podcasters, because there's a lot of people that are completely disengaged from the old world, and they're living on TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. And I think that was a big reason why they won. And another aspect of this new media landscape is also the betting markets, like Polymarket, which I'm not sure if you guys have heard of, or if you even...
I don't know what it is.
So it's like it's a betting site essentially. But what's special about Polymarket is that Polymarket is a decentralized betting market. Not completely, but you could make the case that it's a lot more decentralized than, Robinhood or any of these US-based institutions. And what happened, and what was so interesting, was Elon Musk was in Mar-a-Lago during election night, and he left maybe at like 9 o'clock or something, because he was looking at Polymarket and saw that Trump was leading with 80-20 against Harris before any of the mainstream media outlets was reporting that there even was like a significant difference. I mean, CNBC, CNN kept in some cases painting this picture that no, it's actually really close. Like Biden is leading even in some cases. And here we have this free market. Essentially, that's what a betting market is. It's the people that are putting up money. They're staking real money because now you have the potential to win. And that tends to lead you to the truth. It's not perfect, but we're talking $2 billion that was being betted in volume on this question, who's going to win the election. And so Polymarket, way longer, way before all of the polls and way before the vote count was over, predicted that Trump was going to win. So I think that's also a new trend in this new media landscape, where you're seeing everyday people being journalists on sites like Twitter, but also in a way researchers even, because now these free markets are popping up on the internet.
Where were you during election night?
I was in New York. I was going to see Trump and a lot more people in New York when they were there in Madison Square Garden, but I couldn't make it, unfortunately. But yeah, I was in New York. We were in a bar, me and a couple of friends. On the TV, obviously, it was CNN being played, and yeah, that's where I got that from. They were making the case that this is actually really close. We can't tell, even an hour before.
Okay, yeah. When the victory was declared for him, were you still in that bar?
No, I went to bed because I did the same thing. I checked Polymarket and was like, this is over. It's
I see.
Being misreported.
Because I was in New York. I was living in New York when he won for the first time.
Interesting.
And there was a huge protest outside of Trump Tower. Not my president. Hey, ho, ho. Donald Trump has got to go. A lot of that. You remember hashtag not my president, right? There was a lot of that.
Of course. Well, let me tell you, the day after, you felt it in the air, and it was different. I would not describe it as like that at all. I would describe the temperature as very positive. People were waving American flags. People were wearing MAGA hats. And I don't think I saw a single protest. So if that's what you experienced, then I think we can pretty safely say that it was different this time, and he actually won. It was probably by a huger amount in New York.
It was 2016. LA had its highways blocked. There was protests in London and Amsterdam. When Trump won in 2016, it really alarmed a lot of people. He was never president before. I feel like this time, a lot of people, they've seen what Trump's terms are like, what his experience is like as a president. So it's more easy to digest. But you still have a lot of New Yorkers who would go gung-ho to protest and, socially demonstrate and all that. And I'm wondering if you saw that in New York, but you didn't. So it's interesting.
I didn't. And even the official polls, if we're going to believe them, tell this story, a similar story, which is that New York and San Francisco, which are usually the democratic hubs of the world, even they were pretty close this time. It wasn't like a huge difference. And so there has been a shift, and we don't know how big that shift is because potentially there were fake votes, potentially who knows what. But even come again.
Bigger than I expected.
Yeah, bigger for sure. But Anders, do you want to keep going down this thread? We've talked about why Trump was so hated by the media. Do you feel like we've given a satisfactory answer? I mean, we've tiptoed around an answer.
To be honest, no. But I understand you, because going down the other thread is like going down the rabbit hole, because then you start to get a sense of what's really going on behind. It's like the Wallenberg mass media doesn't hate Trump because of some superficial characteristics. My belief is that they hated him because they knew what he was going to do.
Right.
But we don't have to go down that rabbit hole if you don't want to. But
well, that's an interesting. I think you summed it up fairly well there. I think one route we can go down is this question of how constitutional the United States really can become. We heard, Anders, you're basically a constitution maximalist, or whatever you want to call it. I would put myself in a similar boat, or describe myself similarly. I think the Constitution is almost like a holy document. I don't want to become too dogmatic, but I think it's a fairly well constructed piece of work, and there's this issue that we've seen in the United States, which is that you might be able to adhere to the Constitution for a while, but then you sort of drift, and you might be able to get back closer to the founding spirit for 4 years, but then another person gets elected, and you put in reforms that makes it even harder to remember what America was about. So it would be interesting to spitball some ideas for how to make this better. I mean, what I'm essentially doing here is critiquing democracy almost. I'm not saying we should get rid of democracy, but there does seem to be some sort of fundamental trade-off where you allow every person to vote on everything, and that can make the country drift.
Unlimited rule of the majority. That's the original classical definition of democracy, where the Athenians could gather and have an election, or a referendum rather, deciding to execute the person. Right. I think, or at least the legend tells that that's the way Socrates was sentenced. This was public referendum. Yeah, we decide to. Whereas the difference here is that the original concept of the United States was a constitutional republic, where you outline explicitly in the Constitution the limits of government. It's like you cannot have a vote to execute Socrates, for example. So that's, I think that the sort of European concept of democracy has been treacherous in the way that it's designed to hide the forces behind everything. Oh, we have this puppet here and we have this puppet here. Let them fight each other so that we have the conflict backdrop. Oh, there's a fight for something. But in the end, we control both of them, and the agenda will just be that of the puppet masters. And then you can tell the people, well, if you don't like this, why did you vote for that guy? and which is a very cynical way to deal with it. But it's
yes,
that's how it's worked, and that is the way that worked. It has worked in the United States too, unfortunately. I mean, the window of time when the United States was actually a free country, that's pretty slim. I think that the old European powers started to infiltrate very early on, and certainly from 1870s forward, it has been, governed by the crown. And we've seen the introduction of the Federal Reserve and everything. But I think that's about to change.
What largely, I'm reading a book by a very interesting historian, Simon Sebag Montefiore, British historian, and book is over here. Quite a big book, published just last year or 2 years ago.
The World, yeah.
The World. Simon Sebag Montefiore, he's a very famous historian. And, it's important it's a history of the world, and he bounces around these different countries. I'm over here, what's going on in London, what's going on with Paris, with China. It's good when you see U.S. history from the context of world history. How Teddy Roosevelt reacted to the Russo-Japanese War, how Woodrow Wilson got involved in World War I. And a lot of what the Constitution, the Constitution was made largely in an America that was very protective of itself. It was just a handful of colonies in North America that said, okay, let's work together. Let's not give the central government too much power, because the states, the former colonial provinces, they're used to their own rule. Massachusetts with their Puritans, Maryland with the Catholics, Pennsylvania with the Dutch people. Let's have a loose, decentralized government, the United States, the states that are united, and let's see how that goes. They didn't really predict all this crazy mass scale industrial warfare that would eventually lead to the U.S. concentrating more power on top. They didn't really predict that. And that's why the what you see in the U.S. is, in the last 100 years especially, last 50 years too, is just a product of natural forces. But when I go to a European country, if there's one thing I admire over there, is that there's just more dialogue with the government, I feel. In my opinion, this might shock you too, but I feel like there's just more dialogue both with the civic people, right? The body politic in Italy and Netherlands and Poland, and the government, than over here in the US. Over here in the US, there's a lot of political divisions between people and a lot of skepticism towards the government, which I think makes things very difficult to function. You see what I mean? You know what I mean, Gus?
Maybe. So you're saying that there's a bigger political division in amongst the citizens in Europe.
Yes.
Sorry, in the US. Yeah.
Yes. I think so.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think I would agree, but I would also say that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what comes with that is also a wider range of opinions than you have in Europe. In Europe, it is a bit narrow, and if you think differently, let's say you lean a bit more Republican, whatever that means nowadays, as we talked about, like being a Republican in 2024 is essentially, liking free markets, liking free speech. These are liberal values almost, or like traditionally liberal values. So it's a bit confused, but if you do lean that way in Europe, I think you tend to stay quiet, or you tend to want to move to America, because you don't really hear many people thinking that way in Europe. But yeah, there's less open dialogue and less visible conflict, but I think there's a lot of silence silencing and self-silencing going on in Europe that isn't happening in the US.
That's something I noticed. Like, not to sound too American here, but I've noticed how a lot of European countries have this very keep your head down attitude.
Right.
And that is one flaw.
That is one flaw. And I think to your point, Anders, there is a conflict between Europe and America, and it probably is around this to some degree. It's like about wanting to stick your head up, being for the individual, or being a bit more collectivist. That's how I would describe a core part of the conflict between Europe and America. And I'm not sure if that's ever going away, but we can definitely get to a better situation than we are in right now, because the situation now between Europe and America is pretty bad, in my opinion. What's essentially happening is that America is brain draining Europe. It's sucking a lot of talent out of Europe because you have more opportunity in America. And Europe is this, if you want to, be harsh, it's kind of like this museum where we have nice art, we have naked statues, and people from America, they go here for vacation, but they would never consider working here because, the salaries aren't that good and people are a bit more collectivist. So it's like this nice vacation place for Americans, but it's not really where the future is getting built. And it's an interesting question then. Is there a possibility of some sort of revival in Europe? It's not like we don't have industrial hubs. I mean, we make cars, pretty good ones in Europe and Italy. We are pretty good at producing good researchers and scientists, but then they tend to move to America. So there's possibility here, but is it possible to keep it a bit more in-house and not just have everything lead to America in the end?
May I just inquire a little bit, because I know, Albert, you were also curious about this, about Gustav, because you're certainly younger than me, a little bit younger than Albert, or at least you officially belong to another generation. You don't hate Sweden, as far as I can see, or would you correct me on that? I mean,
I like Sweden. It's not the place, I want to spend the rest of my life in, but I think it's one of the better countries to be probably in Europe right now.
Yeah, but at least you appear to be a little bit like the personality type of one of those in the late 1800s, we should say, who emigrated to the United States to make a new future.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a fair point. I'm not representative of the average Swede. I wouldn't say that because, I do have plans to move.
How many other people in your generation among your peers are like you?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think there might be an interesting trend there. Maybe not that, Gen Zers and Generation Alpha that are even younger than Gen Z, it's maybe not so much that they want to move there. There might be a slight difference that they're slightly more inclined, but in what the main difference would be, I think, is their attitude towards America. I mean, if you're growing up now, you're essentially growing up in the American empire because you're online, you're watching American media, you're using American applications on your phone. Your phone is at least American branded. So American culture very well. All of Hollywood is being produced in America. And that hasn't really, that's increasingly been the case. And it's certainly the case for my generation. So I think they're embodying a lot more American values than millennials in Sweden.
But at the same time, Gus, the U.S. today is more multinational and multicultural than it has ever been in its history.
That's a good point.
Japan, for example, a lot of people here love Japanese culture. So, and in Europe too.
Yeah, and I think multiculturalism is a part of what it means to be American. I mean, there's no such thing as an American ethnicity. You know, America is a land of immigrants. What's changed, though, is that now recently there's a lot of illegal immigrants, and it's not so much, you know, people wanting to come there to contribute. It's more wanting to come there to flee, and in some cases even leech, you know. But it's there are different situations, but that has been a shift. But I think it's important to remember that point when talking about immigration, that you know, America is this sort of self-selected population of people wanting to go on an adventure and seek better opportunities, and that's what makes it a great country.
It is, but like, excuse me for playing devil's advocate here, right? Like, I admire a lot of things here, but I do think that when I do think that the dark sides of the U.S. of America have such a level of darkness to them that European countries just don't have, like school shootings, like a lot of these crazy things that happen here, and people here in the U.S. look at Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, and they're like, oh, look how sweet they are, look how safe they are, look how welcoming a lot of the things over there are, and look how not divisive they are. And look how pretty the streets are, right? And that's another one. Over here, a lot of the darker sides of America, it is more multicultural, it is more multinational, and it's easier to assimilate. But the dark side of that is that there's also a lot of friction that comes with that. A lot of friction, you know? And
may I interject here, because there was something interesting that Gustav talked about. I mean, talking about Hollywood and all the American culture pouring into Sweden and making maybe Swedish youth.
I have a Shakira cup.
Yeah, I get the impression that we're essentially, you know, state in the United States of America, but. Here's the crux, and here's the conspiracy theory and everything like that.
Go ahead.
What if that is only American by proxy? I mean, let's suppose you have European entities controlling media, entertainment in the United States, and it echoes back, but it's really Europe programming people via the United States. I mean, if you, I mean, there was something that struck me when I lived in Spain, and I made a trip to the UK, which I visited many times before, but traveling from Spain, and you would imagine that, oh, well, Britain is culturally more similar to Sweden than Spain. You would imagine that the culture shock would be greater going from Sweden to Spain rather than going from Sweden to the UK. Okay. But somehow I felt when I landed there that, no, wait a minute, this is another world. They drive on the left side of the street. They still have their phone booths. There was this sense of non-conformity, which you could feel in small details, which didn't have anything to do with mainstream entertainment or anything like that. And I imagine if you were to travel to the United States to fly over territory and meet the people there, which I've never done, unfortunately. But in the interaction, maybe you would pick up the genuine America, the old, I mean, in their values, in their interaction and so on, which is never really conveyed via mass media to Sweden. Or, I mean, Europe. Do you get my point? That, I mean, America by proxy versus genuine America.
Yes, there's a clear difference there. And I would agree that what you're seeing in American modern media is very different from the founding spirit of the founding American spirit. That is very different, of course. I mean, just one of the main issues, free speech, that's not really being promoted by Hollywood. But then to counterpoint, UK was the country sending a letter to X, formerly Twitter, when they were practicing free speech. UK wanted Elon to silence people. They were against everyone having a say on the platform, and they were against bringing back people like Alex Jones and Trump, etc. These, characters.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the official.
The official, yeah.
I get your point. It's a good point. Just like the official Sweden, certainly, and even the official United States. They are, I mean, what they are, so to speak. But I think that in going from the UK, you can get a first sense of this, non-conformist spirit. And then if you go to Australia, Canada, maybe you get a little bit more of it, and the most of it you get in the United States. Maybe.
Because ultimately, U.S., not a lot of Americans pay attention to this as much, but the U.S. depends on the rest of the world in many ways, just as a lot of the rest of the world depends on the U.S. We need to export things outside. We need to export Nike, and Hollywood makes more money overseas total today on most of the big films than it does domestically. All you have to do, if you Kung Fu Panda in China is huge, it makes more money there than it does here. All you have to do is grab a bunch of like big population countries, Canada, Brazil, India, boom, 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 and that's it. You have a success. What comes with that is that the U.S. in turn becomes more multicultural. It becomes much more diverse. Being American becomes a concept, right? You use Fahrenheit, you use miles and inches. You're more casually dressed. You drink Gatorade. I don't know. Like, I wanted to ask you this, Gus. Like, you went to New York, you went to Austin, in Texas. Like, how do you feel like in this everyday American society? Like it's a culture shock for you. For me, it's something that I know way too well. But how is it like for you? Like, you're coming from a monarchy, for God's sakes. Over here, that's such a taboo thing.
Again, not representative of the average Swede, probably, but I'm a fan. I like the free-spiritedness of American citizens. I'm not sure I would agree. I don't know too many British people, but the few I've met, they've been sort of like Swedes, which is you're not supposed to really, stick out, keep your head down, don't try to make too much noise. And Americans, of course, as we all know, are the opposite. They like to be loud, immediately when an American is in the room, and they like to try new things. Essentially, they're more open-minded. There's been research on this. There's a scale called Big Five in psychology where you have a few traits, and one of them is openness to experience, which is essentially being interested in art, being creative, being innovative, and Americans score higher than Europe. So I think that's the main difference. And sometimes that comes out very, openness is very hit or miss. Sometimes it leads to these great inventions and pieces of music and film, but many times it's weird, it's Gatorade, it's shorts, it's not having any fashion sense. And of course, they don't have a cultural infrastructure really to build on when it comes to taste. But to give them credit, at least they're creating something new. And if I were to bet on the next the next 1,000 years, who's going to have created more new culture, it's not going to be Europe, because we're kind of resting on our laurels when it comes to that. We created a lot of culture a while ago, but we're not really doing too much stuff now. So I like it. I like being in America, but yeah, it comes with downsides. And I think a big reason why you're seeing these downsides like drug addicts and the opioid epidemic is there's probably a bit too many people in the country that shouldn't be there. You know, the way I see it is that the world should be like a smorgasbord of options. What kind of society do I want to live in? And now, for a while, we've been sort of trying to homogenize societies, and we try to apply the same sort of framework. And that's not a very diverse strategy. What if I want to live in a very different society? And America is very different. It's this weird experiment where you reduce government size, you reduce government spending, and you let people to roam a bit freely. And it has its upsides, it has its downsides. And if you don't like it, you don't need to be here. But I think it should be an available option, because if we don't have it, where else are you going to go?
It's definitely fun, isn't it?
It's really fun.
America's more fun than, like, Europe is more boring than after you live there for a while. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people can be so, you know, they keep their heads down so much that it just gets boring. Whereas over here, you do have more action. You do have more intensity.
That's for sure.
And it comes at the cost of like some crazy shit happening, you know, but it creates energy, you know. It's also why Japan in the 80s and 90s and even today to some degree is a bit filled. They have more action. The young people there, whatever's left of them, are much more like adventurous. And China too. Why does the country of Mao Zedong have been better at like crafting technology than like France, Italy, Germany, Britain? I mean, it's because they foster some sort of innovation over there, as dictatorial as they are. I wish that a lot of more European countries wouldn't be so afraid to, like, a lot of European governments walk on eggshells all the time. Are we allowed to do this? Oh, I don't think so. Well, let's check in with this department. Well, we need to have a meeting over this. People think like that too much over there. And here in America, we don't. We just, let's give this a shot. That's how we think.
Yeah. Anders, what do you think of Europe right now? What should it be trying to be doing? Should it be broken up? Maybe, you know, is EU a dead end as a union? Any thoughts on how we can improve the situation in Europe?
Oh, I mean, I used to like the EU based on what was good about it. I mean, you could travel freely. I mean, you could exchange goods, and I hope that will prevail, because, I mean, I like that aspect. But then, of course, there came the European Parliament and all these bureaucrats and, you know, all these deep staters who I mean, essentially want to use this as a platform for their agenda, and that I think should go away, definitely. But I mean, I like the common market and things like that. So why should you? I mean, you just like in the United States of America, you have free trade, don't you? Why shouldn't we have it in Europe still? No, I mean, essentially, keep what's good and throw away what's bad.
And what is bad?
I mean, it's the state. Just the state.
The agenda.
Yeah. I mean, you don't even have to call it the deep state. Well, why do you call it? I mean, essentially, why do you call it the deep state? Why don't you just call it the state? It's the name of Plato's Republic in Swedish. You know, you don't call it the state in English because that can be confused with state of affairs and state of this. But it's actually quite clear cut in the Swedish title, Staten, the Republic. I mean, because what he's describing, Plato, is the state. He's not describing really a republic. It's just a mistranslation. So there you have it. There's the blueprint.
Okay, guys, we're coming up on 75 minutes. Mm-hmm. It would be fun to try to make some sort of. We don't have to make the same sort of high stakes bet, but would be fun to hear if you guys have some sort of prediction for this cycle with Mr. Donald J. Trump. What's going to happen? Doesn't have to be something that he does, but is there something that you would, be pretty confident is going to happen? Something out of the extraordinary. I can, just to get started, I could give my prediction, and it would be that, and it's maybe a bit of a hope as well. It's that the United States is going to become a bit healthier, because one of the new people in the administration that they just announced is going to be part of Trump's cabinet is RFK. And RFK is this, highly knowledgeable health expert that almost discredits him to call him an expert. He wouldn't like experts, but, he has a plan to look into why Americans are so damn unhealthy and fat. How do we clean up the food supply, the water supply? And it's a really interesting experiment. I'm very biased as well, because I tend to trust people that live what they preach, and this guy certainly does. I think he's almost 70 years old. He's certainly over 60, but he's jacked. He has a six-pack. He looks good, and he eats cleanly. So I think that's like one of these fun American experiments that you mentioned, Albert. It's just going to be fun to watch how that plays out. But I think it's going to be positive. I think it's going to, you don't see really public health change over 4 years, but I think it's going to start a good trend.
Yeah. What I mostly predict is, I think that it's hard for me to predict some very specific things, but the most specific thing I could think of would be that I think that next year, the Ukraine-Russia war will close, and Trump will he will get involved. He will be involved in the peace treaty or a truce, and at any rate, he's going to play a major role in finishing that war, concluding
that would
it.
Be sweet.
Sign these papers. That's it.
That would be very good. Anders.
Yeah, no, I think it will play out like let's all the bad things happen during the Biden presidency, so we get that image. Biden was bad. And then all the peace treaties and everything like that with Trump, and then it will be, Trump is good. Yeah, that sounds logical. I look forward to it.
And I look forward to your public embarrassment, Albert. Maybe we'll feature it in our next episode. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Let's talk soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.